Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Interesting History Podcast. I wanted to take a little bit of a look today at a question that comes up on the history subreddit quite often, and that is, what can I do with a history degree? Are history degrees useful? Should I pursue? I have a real strong interest in history. Should I pursue a history degree? And it's often met with quite a bit of negativity from the history subreddit community, saying that you really shouldn't go for this. It's a lot of people posting, I have a history degree and now I work at McDonald's. I have a history degree and I still have 12 years until I have my doctorate. And I want to not only kind of dispel those myths, but I also want to talk about how we as a society in the United States, in the historical departments at colleges and universities, can change this. And I also am interested in what your guys' thoughts are in how we can do this. So let's jump first with, what can I do with a history degree? Now, I personally have a 4-year history degree from the University of Nebraska Kearney, and I have it, and I think I can kind of sympathize with a lot of these people that come to this subreddit and say, hey, I have an interest in history. Should I pursue this degree? Maybe they're in high school. I knew that I was interested in history probably in 8th grade, which is, 13, 14 years old. But the deterrent from not necessarily, I mean, my parents, yes, but also like everyone, if you said, yeah, I'm going to go to college and get a history degree, the first thing is they say, well, you're not going to make any money. And you're kind of taught at an early age that money is good. Money means happiness. And as I got through my first 2 years of college, I quickly realized that the degree that I thought that I wanted to get into wasn't for me. I was going to go into a degree where you kind of had to schmooze up with people, and I'm more of a silent, reserved typed person. I don't like to go to these social gatherings and be outgoing and talk to people. And the only thing that really kept me going to class and going and continuing towards a degree were my history classes. I was taking 1 to 2 history classes every semester when you really didn't need to. You needed to take like 2 your first year and then be done. I quickly looked at it and said, I'm actually on the same path towards a history degree as I am towards the degree I'm going in. So what I basically did is I switched and I have a history degree and a minor in sports administration. So the two don't really go together. I've never really pursued anything in a sports administration field, but history was the thing that kept me going to school, kept me interested. So what can you do with a history degree? And this is kind of where people will push you away. So you maybe can get an entry-level museum job. I know I live in a fairly big city. There's a few museums, which is kind of what you're looking for when you have a degree in history. Kind of. There's also other degree fields that you could get, museum studies and that sort of thing. But the museums in the city where I live basically only take entry-level positions as part-time and as in volunteer work. And when you're trying to pay off college debt, but also support a family, you can't volunteer 30 hours a week to work at a museum that you might eventually get a full-time job in if someone were to happen to leave. And I actually totally noticed this. I went to this museum a couple of months ago. My wife and I did, because they had a World War I exhibit. And as soon as we walked in and got to the main exhibit, I turned to my wife and I go, this is why I would never have a job here. And it was basically retired older gentlemen that enjoyed the topic. I don't have anything against them at all, but they're there volunteering their time. You know, they have the volunteer name tags, they have everything. And I think that is probably a position that they could fill. But I think it's also because of a lack of funding for museums. So the other option you really have with a history degree is to go and get your master's. A master's in history would allow you to work, if you got a teaching certificate at high schools, community college, maybe get you to an actual like salary position in a museum or at a historical society, something of that nature. So it's an additional 2 years. It's kind of, you have to know going into it that the 4-year degree isn't really going to get you what you want. And for me, I think the societal pressures to just have a degree is what pushed me to go, I know I could get a degree in history very easily. It's something that comes very easy to me. I never had to study for a test. Typing papers were a little bit more difficult just because of my attention span, but I knew that a history degree was going to be very easy. So, for me anyway. So I went towards that. So, do I have an urge to go and get my master's? No. The only thing that would probably do that for me would be, I always joke that if like the draft came around, we get in some big war with Russia, well, I'm enrolling in my master's degree because they won't take me if I'm in school. But whether or not that would be true or not is up to debate. But I want to move on to the next question. Are history degrees useful? So we already kind of talked about it. Since a degree, a lot of times, especially for like major corporations, if you're going to move to a big city like I did, a degree is pretty important to even get an entry level position at these companies. So that's what I had. I had a degree in history, and I went and worked for a relatively small e-commerce company where I live, that was later purchased by a bigger one and then purchased by a bigger one. So I work for one of the top 3 companies in the world right now with a degree in history. Has nothing, my history degree has nothing to do with e-commerce, but there's a few things that a history degree will teach you, and if you have the right brain, and like a history degree and studying history gives you not only critical thinking skills, but it gives you the ability to do research and to dig into issues. And that's kind of what I do in my job. My boss comes to me and says, hey, I need, this data pulled. Can you analyze this data? So I'm using my critical thinking skills to analyze the data, kind of figure out what she needs for me, or for me to pull for her. But it also allows me to analyze that data and say, okay, this is kind of what she's looking for. This is where the issue is. Here it is. And I can, it cuts out steps. I don't really want to speak too much into what other sort of fields, just because I don't have experience. A lot of people can say you can go into law, you can go into copywriting, because a lot of a history degree is writing, but I don't necessarily have experience with that. So I don't want to speak to that too much. Another thing that's pretty important with history degrees is that there's too many people right now with the degree with too little work. There's no museums, like I said, looking for positions that actually pay. They want a lot of experience, which you're not going to have straight out of college. And there's also no universities hiring for you to become maybe a teacher's aide or something without at least a master's or a doctorate. So you do need to spend that extra 2 years and move towards your master's degree. So I've kind of told you the current state of the field, gave you a little bit of background in myself, but the thing that I wanted to actually talk to everyone about, and hopefully get a little bit of feedback of what you guys thought, would be what could we change to not only push more people towards the history degree, because it actually is, less people are enrolling in history classes and getting history degrees. How can we change this? So right now you have, going into college, you have, if you want to be, let's say, a professor or I would say probably like a historical author, air quotes, because even a lot of historical authors today, if you think of Ron Chernow, John Meacham, I'm just thinking like American authors, they're actually all English. They all have degrees in English. They don't have degrees in history. They know how to tell a story. They don't know how to necessarily go and do the research fully. Now they do some of the research, but they have a team that kind of pulls all of Washington's letters in and pulls all of John Adams' letters in. So can we pull that 10-ish years of school down into a shorter time period? And I have a couple of examples that I would give where I think you could cut a few years off. Could we have more specific high school classes? So I took one, what we called AP history class. I took European history when I was a junior in high school. And then I took one AP class for government my senior year. But could we have a more tailored history class offering? Now, a lot of people are going to kind of do what the other people in my class did. They were there so that they didn't have to take it in college. Great. But if you have the right sort of professor, I think a lot more people will be more interested in history going to college. And maybe you can turn them towards that degree. The other thing that I would argue is at the university that I went to, the people that were working towards their masters were in the same classes as the people working towards their bachelors. The only difference was the people working on their masters had to give a 40-minute presentation, basically teach one class, and they had to do double the length of the last paper than the bachelor's people. So say you had to do a 10-page paper at the end of the semester, the people working towards their masters just had to do a 20-page paper. Now, why am I retaking a class I already took to do double the work? To me, you should almost extend that AP curriculum to people in the history field. You know that if they're a history major, go ahead, offer them the ability to do more work, do double, teach one class. I think because you have to go 4 years, you take all your history classes, then you come back, you take probably half of the same classes you already took, depending on what field you're what specific time period or age that you want to go look at. You're taking all the same classes again, maybe half of the same classes. You're just doubling the work that you had to do. In my eyes, I didn't have to study for any tests. The papers, like I said, were kind of the issue for me. I would have been more than willing to teach one class and write twice the paper length that I needed to. I still wouldn't have had to study for the tests. Like, not only does it prepare you for the outside world, it just cuts down on time. And I get that, like, universities, they need money and they need you to enroll in things, but I think that there needs to be an incentive to the student to try to make that faster. So let me know what you guys think about that. Maybe some universities around the country offer that. I definitely didn't have it. Maybe your high school offers more than I think they offered. They literally only offered American or European history. So basically your entry-level history classes at my high school. You'll have to let me know if things were different maybe where you live here in the US. And if you're outside of the US, let me know what we would consider high school history works, college history, how a degree works over there. I'm super interested to find out. So the last thing I wanted to cover is kind of what does the future of the history degree look like? Like I said, there are less people enrolling in history classes. I read an article that someone posted on the history subreddit saying that I think history enrollment in history degrees was down maybe 4%. And I'll try to find that article and post it down in the description. And basically the argument was that less African American and Asian American, those sort of subgroups weren't enrolling basically, and it was kind of just white males and females that were enrolling in history classes. Now they kind of broke that down. I'll post the article down below. But the other thing that you really have to do, and I've kind of learned that I need to do, is I think the future for a history degree is going to be more of a creative aspect. And you kind of see that quite a bit. There's a huge surge right now in historical-based YouTube content. You had the Great War that just went through 4 years, week by week of the war, with like sub-episodes on people and battles and events. You have Kings and Generals, who's posting like 2 to 3 historical documentaries a week. You have, a litany of hundreds of YouTube history channels. Now, there's not really any money in that unless you can get a group of people to back you, whether that be Patreon, or I think the Great War had like a private company fund the starting up, and then they had a Patreon to kind of do extra things. But that's kind of how I see the future of the history degree. I don't see a lot of people my age going to school for 8 to 10 years, learning another language, going and studying abroad to write that dissertation paper. I think it's a lot easier for us now to have something like a YouTube channel, learn video editing. That's something that I never really learned and still have to kind of learn. I do YouTube, but it's gaming. Start a podcast. You really like to tell historical stories. There's nothing better than a podcast. And, the leader, air quotes, I'm doing air quotes, of historical podcasting has a degree in military history, and that's all he has. I'm super interested to see what you guys think. Maybe I'm overthinking it, but I do think that things need to change, at least in the United States, and how degrees in history are earned. So I want to thank you guys very much for listening, and I hope to talk to you guys down in the comments below.